They thought their toxin was unbeatable, until a human took a sip. HFY Sci-Fi story. The sky burned the color of dying embers when the ships came. No sound, no warning. Just shadows, enormous, endless shadows, stretching across the clouds as the sun dimmed like a candle under glass. People stopped in the streets, staring upward, phones in hand, hearts beating like war drums. It wasn't fireworks, it wasn't meteors, it was them. The ships of the Wrath Dominion slid silently into orbit, their black hulls swallowing the light. They were sleek and smooth, alive almost like predators drifting above prey. They didn't demand surrender, they didn't broadcast threats, they didn't even speak. They just watched. For 3 days the world held its breath. Governments shouted across airwaves, soldiers took positions, and scientists tried to send messages into the void. Nothing came back, no voice, no signal, only silence. Then on the morning of the 4th day, the air began to change. It started in New Delhi, people coughing, clutching their throats, collapsing in the streets. Then London, then Cairo, then New York. Within hours, every major city was choking. The gas was invisible. No color, no smell, no taste. It slipped through vents, under doors, through masks and filters. Birds fell from the sky mid-flight. Dogs whimpered and went still. Crops wilted. Oceans foamed. And yet above it all, the Wrath ships didn't move. They simply hovered, patient and calm, like gods observing the end of creation. They called it in their tongue the gift of cleansing. To the Wrath, the toxin was perfect. It dissolved proteins, ate through blood, shut down every known form of oxygen-based life. On 100 worlds, it had wiped entire civilizations clean, no bodies left, just dust and silence. They had perfected it over centuries, designing it to leave planets ready for their kind to inherit. To them, Earth was nothing but another harvest. But humanity didn't vanish quietly. Even as the first wave of death swept across the continents, humans fought to live. Hospitals overflowed. Soldiers set up quarantine zones. Firefighters went door to door pulling people from homes. There were screams, yes, but there was also defiance. Some sealed themselves underground. Others fled to the mountains or deep into the sea on submarines. Some prayed, some cursed. And some, even as they coughed blood, raised their fists at the sky and shouted, "Come down here and finish it." The Wrath watched with amusement. They had seen this before so many times. The final tantrum of dying creatures, the futile rage before extinction. But there was something about humans that unsettled them. On other worlds, death had come with silence, acceptance. Here, even in agony, there was noise, shouting, singing, fighting. Humans screamed at the stars instead of begging for mercy. To the Wrath, it was strange. To humans, it was natural. Because no one tells a human to die quietly. By the 2nd week, the cities were nearly empty. Skies cleared of aircraft, oceans were still. The Wrath began landing probes, confident that resistance was over. Their scientists stepped onto the soil in shining armor, breathing easily in their sealed suits. They recorded the devastation: charred trees, motionless streets, rivers turned gray. One of them, a thin, scaled creature named Vraxtil, made notes in his log. World 1423. Planet exhibits resistance levels within predicted range. No survivors detected. Toxin performance, 99.998% effective. Commencing purification phase. He paused, scanning the landscape with golden eyes. A human doll floated by in a puddle. He nudged it aside with his boot. Pitiful, he hissed softly. They never even fought back. Behind him, his companion chuckled through the helmet radio. They never do. Vraxtil turned his gaze upward. The air shimmered faintly in the sunlight. The toxin had already begun breaking down organic matter. Within days, Earth would be clean, just as all the others were. But as he turned to leave, a faint sound caught his attention. A thump. Then another's. He frowned and gestured for silence. The others froze. From behind a pile of rubble, a figure rose. Human, male, dirty, bleeding, coughing, but alive. He stared at the aliens through bloodshot eyes. And then he smiled. Not the smile of a desperate creature, not fear. Something colder, stronger. "Is that all you got?" he rasped. The aliens raised their weapons, startled. But before they could fire, the human laughed. a ragged, broken sound, but full of something that sent a shiver down their scales. Defiance. And for the first time in 1,000 conquests, the Wrath Dominion felt something new. Uncertainty. The alien scientists had gathered around the viewing screens, whispering in disbelief. There he was, the same human from the ruins, the one who had stood up from the ash and smiled. Now he was inside one of their containment domes, surrounded by sterile light and humming machines. His wrists were chained, but his back was straight. His skin was burned, lungs scarred, and yet his eyes burned brighter than the sun through the dome's haze. Captain Jonah Red, the last survivor of the New York resistance. The Wrath called him Subject 12 Delta. Vrack still stood on the other side of the glass, watching the man pace slowly in the sealed room. "He's been exposed to the full toxin for 40 hours, he muttered. "He should be." "Dead," Jonah's voice came through the speaker before the scientist could finish. His accent was rough, his tone mocking. "Yeah, you said that yesterday, too." Vrack still stiffened. The translator picked up the words, filtered them through static, and made them sound almost calm. But the way the humans said them, it carried no fear. "You humans are resilient," Vraxtel said finally, as if trying to sound detached. "But this resistance is meaningless. You will die as all others have died. Our gas is flawless. No life form has survived it." Jonah grinned, slow and feral. "Guess you never met a man from Detroit." The room behind Vraxtel filled with the dry hiss of alien amusement. One of the Dominion officers leaned forward, smirking behind his mask. "Perhaps it is defective," he said, nodding toward the human. "Shall we test the strain directly?" Vraxtel hesitated, but curiosity won. "Begin secondary exposure." Inside the dome, a thin stream of vapor began to leak from vents in the ceiling, clear, harmless-looking. Jonah squinted at it. The smell was faintly metallic, like old pennies and rain. He coughed once, twice. Then he laughed. "Smells like a subway tunnel in July," he said. The scientists flinched at the sound. Humans weren't supposed to laugh while dying. They were supposed to beg. Jonah walked over to the observation window, staring straight into Vraxtel's golden eyes. He looked tired, half-dead, but that grin never left. "So," he said, tapping the glass, "this is your magic death smoke, huh? The thing that cleanses worlds." Vraxtel didn't respond. Jonah looked around, spotted a metal cup on the floor, the one they'd left for him, filled with sterile water. He picked it up, held it under the vent, and let the gas hiss into it until the water bubbled faintly, glowing sickly green. The aliens leaned forward, watching in silent horror. "Don't," Vraxtel started. Jonah raised the cup to his lips. His hands shook, his breathing was ragged, but his eyes never wavered. "To humanity," he whispered. And he drank. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then he coughed hard, blood splattered the glass. The aliens relaxed, murmuring among themselves. "I told you," one hissed, "it cannot be beaten." But Jonah was still standing. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, spat on the floor, and looked up again. His voice came hoarse but steady. "Little bitter," he rasped, "but I've had worse coffee." The room fell silent. Every Wrath scientist froze. Vraxtel felt the air catch in his throat. "That's impossible," he whispered. "The toxin decomposes carbon bonds, it burns through cell structure." Jonah just shrugged. "Guess mine's built different." He sat down, breathing heavily but alive, while the aliens scrambled to read their instruments. The data made no sense. Instead of killing him, the toxin was breaking apart inside his body, neutralized, burned out by chemical reactions they didn't understand. It was as if his immune system had looked at their perfect weapon and said, "Not today." Vraxtel's claws trembled against the console. How did your kind?" Jonah cut him off with a grin. "You ever heard of a thing called tequila?" "What?" "Yeah, or battery acid, or bad tap water in Vegas. We've been poisoning ourselves since before we could walk upright. You think some fancy alien mist is gonna top that?" The room stayed silent, except for the steady hum of machines. Jonah leaned closer to the glass. His eyes were wild, fever-bright. "You should have studied us better," he said. "You wanted a clean world, but we're not clean. We never were. That's why we survive." Then he coughed again, hard, deep, but when he straightened up, he was still smiling. "Now," he said, voice low and fierce, Why don't you let me out of this box, and I'll show you what our kind of toxin looks like. For the first time in their history of conquest, the Wrath Dominion didn't laugh. Because they realized something terrifying. Their perfect poison had just met a species that called it a drink. The control chamber was silent, except for the hum of machines and the soft, uneven breathing of the alien scientists. Every eye, every golden, slit-pupiled eye, was fixed on the human sitting behind the glass. Captain Jonah Red was still alive. Alive and smirking. Vrack still stared at the data streaming across his console. It didn't make sense. The human's blood was full of toxins enough to kill 10,000 lifeforms, but his body was fighting back. His cells weren't dying. They were adapting, mutating in real time. The Dominion had conquered more than 100 species. None had lasted longer than 2 minutes under exposure. This one had lasted 40 hours. And now he was drinking the poison like it was warm beer. This cannot be, Vrack still whispered. His claws trembled. It is not possible. But it was. On the other side of the glass, Jonah leaned back against the wall, breathing heavily. His skin was pale, his lips cracked, but his grin hadn't faded. He raised a shaky hand and gave a lazy salute toward the viewing window. Guess I'm not your usual lab rat, huh? The translator stuttered to keep up. The words came through choppy, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, fearless, human. One of the younger Wrath officers hissed, "He is a mutation, a freak." Vrack still didn't answer. He couldn't look away. His instruments showed that the toxin, their perfect weapon, was being broken apart by some natural reaction in the man's body. His immune system had turned the alien death gas into harmless waste. They had seen viruses mutate before, bacteria evolve, but not like this. Not this fast, not intentionally. This species, Vraxtel said slowly, is not merely resistant, it is fighting us. Hours later, the footage of Jonah's defiance spread through the Dominion fleet. Across the command ships and colonies, officers watched the human drink the toxin, watched him cough, watched him laugh. Whispers spread through the ranks. The humans live. The gas fails. The cleansing is not perfect. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion felt something unfamiliar, a crack in their certainty. Fear. Jonah sat alone in the dome, humming an old tune under his breath, something from before the war, a song his mother used to sing. His chest hurt, his throat burned, but he was still alive. He could feel it, the pain, the exhaustion, but also something else, a quiet, grim joy. He wasn't just surviving for himself, he was surviving for Earth. He looked up at the dark sky beyond the glass. He could see the faint curve of the alien ships hanging above like vultures. He imagined every fallen city, every lost soul, every voice that had gone silent. He whispered, "Still here, you bastards." In the Dominion's War Council, the mood was chaos. Generals shouted, officers denied the reports, scientists argued over theories. "It is an anomaly," one of them screamed. "One human cannot represent the species." "But there are more," Vraxtel said, pulling up the new readings. "The toxin is failing across several regions. Small groups are surviving, breathing unfiltered air." "What?" The High Commander slammed his clawed hand on the table. "Impossible." Vraxtel's voice shook. "We've detected hundreds, no, thousands of life signs in contaminated zones. They are moving, organizing." The commander turned, his scaled face dark with fury. "Then release more toxin." "We already have," Vraxtel said softly. "It doesn't matter." He looked down at the glowing images of Earth, at the spreading clusters of human life. "They're adapting faster than we can kill them." The room fell quiet. Then, from the back, one of the younger scientists whispered what everyone was thinking. "They're evolving." Back in the dome, Jonah had been given water and food. He ignored both. He was staring at the vent in the ceiling where the toxin had poured down before. "Do it again," he said into the mic. Vraxtel blinked. "Excuse me." "Turn it back on," Jonah said. "Let's see how much I can take." The alien hesitated. "You wish to die." Jonah gave him a tired smile. "I wish to win, and if I die trying, I'll die proving something." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the glass. His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with quiet fire. "You thought your poison was unbeatable. You thought humans would fall like the rest, but you forgot what we are." Vraxtil swallowed hard. And what is that? Jonah smiled, blood on his teeth, light in his eyes. Stubborn. When the second wave of toxin filled the chamber, Jonah didn't cough. He stood taller, stronger. The readings went wild, his body temperature rising, his blood pressure stabilizing. He was immune. The Dominion scientists watched in horror as the man who should have been long dead raised his arms, inhaled deeply, and shouted through the glass. "You're not gods, you're just bad chemists." And for the first time in Dominion history, the laughter of a single human echoed through their fleet, and it terrified them. The Dominion's fleets hung above Earth like vultures circling a corpse. Only now, the corpse was starting to move. Across the dying world, pockets of humanity were stirring, small, stubborn clusters that refused to stay dead. At first, the Wrath thought it was interference, static, false readings. But soon, the truth was impossible to ignore. Humans were walking through the toxin, unprotected, unafraid. In the ruined streets of New York, soldiers with burned lungs ripped off their gas masks and took deep breaths of poisoned air. In London's flooded tunnels, medics worked barehanded, breathing easily. In Tokyo, a little girl stepped out from a shelter, looked up at the dark sky, and smiled. The Dominion called it a failure of containment. Humans called it a miracle. Deep inside an abandoned bunker, Captain Jonah Red sat before a cracked screen, his face half lit by static light. He looked thinner now, harder, but his eyes carried that same iron fire. A dozen survivors gathered around him, soldiers, engineers, medics, civilians. They all waited silent as Jonah stared into the flickering camera. "Is it working?" he asked. A young woman nodded. "Yes, sir, broadcasting now, every open channel." Jonah leaned forward, took a slow breath, and began. "To any human still alive, this is Captain Red of the New York Resistance. They tried to kill us with poison. They thought we'd lie down and die. They were wrong. We've learned something. Their gas doesn't kill us anymore. It makes us stronger. It's changed us, adapted us. So if you're hearing this, take off your mask, stand up, breathe, fight." He paused, voice cracking slightly, but his tone stayed steady. "They wanted a clean planet. We'll give them one after we scrub them off it." The room filled with quiet laughter, soft but full of fury. That message spread faster than the toxin ever did. Across the planet, humans began to rise. In orbit, the Dominion Council watched in disbelief. On the screens, soldiers in tattered armor marched through the gas with flamethrowers, rifles, and makeshift flags. Entire battalions shouted in unison. "Your poison is our air now." One Wrath general hissed, "They are insane." Vraxtil shook his head. "No," he said quietly, "they are human." The humans began striking back. They learned how to capture the toxin, how to reverse its chemistry. In old labs and abandoned factories, scientists worked without sleep, turning the Dominion's weapon into something new, something deadly to them. They called it Project Retort. The process was brutal and unstable, but humans didn't care. They mixed the toxin with their own altered blood, their sweat, their DNA. They built crude bombs that hissed with green vapor, whispering vengeance. When the first Dominion patrol landed to test a new region, the air was quiet. Then one of their soldiers screamed as his armor began to corrode. His lungs melted in seconds. The others panicked. The toxin, their toxin, was killing them. Jonah watched the first strike from a mountain outpost. He stood beside the same young woman from the bunker, Lieutenant Kara Vale. Below them, the valley glowed faintly where the enemy patrol had fallen. "Looks like it works," Kara said. Jonah nodded slowly. "Good, because we're not done yet." He turned toward the camera drone hovering nearby. "Record this." The drone beeped, recording. Jonah looked straight into the lens. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, but his eyes burned. "To the Wrath Dominion," he said, voice low but clear. "You wanted us gone, you tried to cleanse us, you thought we'd beg for mercy. You forgot who we are. We drink what kills us, we burn what breaks us, and when the smoke clears, we're still here." He reached down, uncapped a small canister, and held it up, a swirling mix of alien green and human red. "This is for every city you wiped out. Every family you took, every child who never got to breathe free air. He tossed it into the valley below. A bright green cloud erupted, spreading fast, carried by the wind toward the enemy ships on the horizon. You call it the gift of cleansing, Jonah said. We call it the gift of return. In space, the Dominion's fleet began to detect something strange. Atmospheric readings changed. The Toxin, their weapon of conquest, had turned on them. Vraxtil stared at the screens in horror as alarms blared. The humans, they've reversed it, he whispered. On the monitor, the image of Jonah appeared again, live broadcast, bloodied, grinning, eyes burning with a fire no poison could dim. You should have left us alone, Jonah said. Now breathe our air for a change. The transmission cut. And for the first time, the Wrath Dominion, the proud, ancient conquerors, felt the cold taste of their own poison fill their lungs. The skis of Earth burned again, but this time the fire was theirs. The Dominion ships had begun to fall. Not all at once, not in glorious explosions, but piece by piece. Systems failing, engines choking, their great vessels turning against themselves. The humans had learned to fight back. They didn't have fleets, they didn't have plasma cannons or energy shields. What they had was worse. Vengeance, ingenuity, and the poison that once killed them now burning in their enemies' lungs. In the shattered remains of Washington, D.C., what was once the Pentagon now served as humanity's new war command. The walls were blackened, the ceilings cracked, but the lights glowed again, powered by scavenged Dominion reactors. Jonah Red stood in the center of the chaos, his uniform torn, his hands wrapped in bandages. All around him, people shouted into radios, worked on maps, recalculated atmospheric patterns. Status on retort deployment, he barked. A young engineer, face smeared with soot, turned from his console. Phase 2 complete, sir. Retort clouds are spreading through the eastern hemisphere. Dominion casualties massive. Jonah allowed himself one breath, just one, and hours. The room fell silent. Finally, the engineer said, "Some of us still can't handle full exposure. We're losing people in contaminated zones." Jonah nodded slowly. "Keep the antidotes flowing, nobody gets left behind." His voice carried the weight of 1,000 lost voices. He still heard them in his sleep, the screaming, the gasping, the endless silence that came after. But now there was purpose behind that pain. Far above Earth, the Dominion flagship Wrath Anar struggled to maintain control. Inside, chaos reigned. Officers barked orders, alarms blared, and the once sterile halls now stank of death. The very air that once made them gods was now killing them. Vraxtil staggered through the smoke, clutching his rebreather. His golden scales had dulled to gray. He stumbled into the command deck where the High Commander lay slumped against the wall, coughing blood. "They've weaponized it," Vraxtil rasped. "They've turned the Toxin against us." The commander's eyes blazed with rage and fear. "Impossible. How could they understand our formula?" "They didn't need to understand it," Vraxtil whispered. "They felt it, they adapted, they learned." He looked at the feed from Earth, thousands of humans walking through clouds of green vapor, carrying banners, guns, and fire. "They call it Project Retort," he said. "They've made our poison their own." The commander tried to stand, failed, and fell to one knee. "Then burn the planet, use the plasma." Vraxtil looked down at him, his throat tightening. "If we burn it now, we destroy the samples, we destroy everything." "Then we die," the commander roared. Vraxtil hesitated. He looked once more at the human transmissions still coming through the system. Jonah's voice echoed through the speakers. "You brought death to our world. We turned it into life. Now you'll breathe the price." Back on the ground, Jonah climbed to the top of a ruined skyscraper. The sky above glowed with streaks of fire, the Dominion fleet breaking apart, falling piece by piece. Beside him, Lieutenant Cara Vale watched through binoculars. "It's working," she said, almost whispering. Jonah didn't smile. He just watched, quiet and grim. "Not done yet," he said. "They still have ships in orbit." "We can't reach them," she said. Jonah nodded slowly. "Not with rockets, no." He lifted a small device from his belt, an old Dominion transmitter, cracked but still glowing. "We can reach them another way." He handed it to Kara. "Broadcast this signal, make sure they all hear it." The message reached the Dominion fleet seconds later. Every screen aboard their ships flickered. Jonah appeared bruised, bloodied, but standing tall. Behind him, the skis of Earth glowed green and gold, storms of fire twisting through the clouds. "To the Wrath Dominion," he said, his voice steady. "We've sent your toxin back to you. We've filled your ships with it. You called yourselves gods once. You thought your poison would make us kneel. But you forgot, humans kneel for no one." He raised a hand, revealing a small detonator. "This is for every world you burned before us." He pressed the switch. Across the upper atmosphere, detonations rippled through the clouds. The retort gas, now dense and volatile, ignited with the Dominion's own exhaust. Flames engulfed their ships, tearing through metal like paper. From the surface, the people of Earth watched the sky blaze brighter than a sunrise. Jonah and Kara stood together, the wind whipping around them as debris rained down like meteors. "Think they'll come back?" she asked. Jonah stared up, his face calm, the reflection of the burning sky in his eyes. "No," he said quietly, "but if they do..." He looked at the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to rise through the haze. "We'll be ready." High above, the last Dominion ship crumbled, scattering across the void. Vraxtil's final words echoed into the silence. "They drink death and call it life. They are not a species. They are a storm." And as the fires faded, humanity stood tall once more, scarred, changed, but unbroken. Earth had survived the poison. Now it was the galaxy's turn to fear it. The war was over. The skies were clear for the first time in months. The toxin had burned itself away, leaving the air raw but alive. Cities lay in ruins, oceans shimmered with the strange green of ash and memory, and what was left of humanity climbed out from the dark. They had survived somehow. But survival was not enough. Humanity had a message to send. In the wreckage of an old communication tower in what had once been northern Canada, Captain Jonah Red stood on the highest platform. Wind tore at his jacket, scattering dust and snow into the air. The world below him was quiet, too quiet. From here he could see what was left of civilization. Small lights in the distance, campfires flickering where once there had been cities. But those lights meant life. Kara Vale climbed up behind him, clutching a small transmitter, its metal frame patched and humming with unstable power. "We're ready," she said. Jonah turned toward her, eyes shadowed but bright. "This'll reach them." "It'll reach everyone," she said. "The Dominion, their colonies, maybe even the ones watching from farther away." He nodded. "Good." They set the transmitter on the edge of the platform. The red light blinked to life. Jonah leaned close to the mic. His voice went out across every surviving network, bouncing off satellites, riding the very airwaves the Dominion had once used to taunt them. "This is Captain Jonah Red of Earth. To the Wrath Dominion, if you're still alive out there, listen closely. You tried to kill us with your perfect poison. You filled our skis with death and thought we'd break, but we didn't." He paused, letting the silence speak for him. The wind howled through the ruined tower. "You thought we'd disappear quietly. You thought we'd beg. Instead, we breathed in your toxin and turned it into our strength. We made your weapon ours. And now, when you look at Earth, remember, this is the world that survived you." Kara stood beside him, silent, watching the transmitter flicker. The message was already spreading across deep space, across systems that might still hold Dominion survivors. Jonah wasn't finished. "To every other race that's heard their lies, every world they've taken, know this, they can be beaten. They're not gods, they bleed, they choke, they burn, just like we did." His voice softened for a moment, low and heavy. "We paid for this victory in blood, in fire, in loss. But we learned something from it, something they never understood." He raised his head, eyes hard and fierce. "You can't poison a species that's been drinking its own poison for centuries. You can't scare a people who have lived through every kind of hell imaginable. You can't conquer humanity." He leaned closer to the mic. "You can only make us angry." The last word hung in the air like thunder. Far across the void, fragments of the Wrath fleet still drifted in silence. A few damaged ships had managed to limp into dark space, their crews dying slowly, their air thick with bitterness and disbelief. One of those ships picked up the transmission. The few remaining officers gathered around the console as Jonah's voice filled their bridge. "You came to cleanse the galaxy," he said. "Instead, you taught it how to fight back." The alien commander, once proud, now gaunt, stared at the screen, unable to look away. The human's voice was calm, not full of rage, but something worse. "Conviction. We're rebuilding," Jonah said. "We're learning your science, your language, your technology, and when we come for you, we won't bring gas or fire. We'll bring something you never had, mercy. That's what makes us stronger." He smiled then, a tired human smile that somehow made the commander's blood run cold. "Tell your stars this, Earth still breathes." The transmission ended. On the ruined tower, Jonah stepped back. Kara powered down the transmitter and let out a long, shaking breath. "It's done," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, it's done." They stood together in the cold wind, watching the faint aurora flicker across the horizon. Somewhere, the first signs of regrowth had already begun, plants forcing their way through cracked concrete, snow melting into clean water. "Think they'll hear it?" she asked. Jonah smiled faintly. "Oh, they'll hear it, and they'll remember it every time they breathe." He looked out at the rising light on the horizon, pale gold through the smoke. "We're not just survivors anymore," he said quietly. "We're the warninged." And as the sun broke through for the first time in what felt like forever, humanity stood on its broken world, scarred beyond measure, but free. Their message had gone out to the stars. Earth lived, and this time the universe would never forget it. The galaxy had gone quiet. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Wrath Dominion heard nothing but their own breathing. No commands, no victories, no new worlds to cleanse. Just silence. Their fleets were gone, burned in Earth's sky. Their colonies lay dark. The once proud empire that had called itself immortal was now reduced to a handful of broken ships drifting through the void. And everywhere the message from Earth still echoed. "You can't poison humanity." Vrak still sat in what was left of the command deck of the Wrath Honor. The ship's walls were scorched, lights flickering like dying stars. Around him, only a few of his people still lived, gaunt, hollow-eyed, coughing from the toxin that once made them strong. He stared out at the endless stars, the ones he used to dream of conquering. Now they looked cold, distant, unreachable. He remembered Earth, the blue planet that refused to die. He remembered the man, Captain Jonah Red, the one who had drunk their perfect poison and laughed in their faces. That laugh haunted him. "How could they do it?" whispered one of his subordinates, voice thin as paper. "How could they survive what killed everything else?" Vrak still didn't answer for a long time. He turned a small data crystal in his claws, the one containing the footage of Jonah's first test. Finally, he said, "Because they're not like the others. They do not adapt to survive. They choose to." The younger alien frowned. "That is madness." Vrak still almost smiled. "Yes, that is why they won." Back on Earth, months passed. The world was healing, slowly, painfully, beautifully. The skies were clear now, streaked with gold and silver where the debris of alien ships burned as falling stars. The oceans shimmered again. Green was returning to the land. Humanity had changed. Children were born immune to the toxin. New science grew from old ruins. Engineers rebuilt cities using salvaged alien metal. Farmers planted crops that thrived in the poisoned soil. Humanity had not just survived, they had evolved. In the rebuilt capital, New Geneva, Jonah stood on a balcony overlooking the reborn city. Towers made of alloy and glass rose in the distance, glowing with new life. Drones buzzed between them, carrying supplies, tools, and hope. Beside him stood Kara Vale, her hair whipping in the wind. She watched the horizon quietly. "Looks almost peaceful," she said. Jonah nodded, "For now." "You think they'll come back?" He didn't answer right away. "Someone will, maybe not them, but someone. There's always someone who thinks they can take what's ours." Kara smiled faintly. "Then they'll get the same welcome." He looked at her, half smiling, half tired. "You really think we scared the whole galaxy?" She shrugged. "We scared gods, Jonah, that's a start." Far away in the dark reaches of space, a dozen alien signals pulsed faintly, species who had once hidden from the Dominion, now daring to speak again. They shared the message. They repeated the words that had come from the blue planet that defied death itself. You can't poison humanity. They drink what kills them and turn it into strength. They made gods choke on their own weapon. Across the galaxy, humans became a legend, a story whispered around campfires on distant worlds. Some called them monsters, others called them saviors, but all agreed on one thing. You did not challenge Earth. Back aboard the dying Honor, Vrak still sent one last transmission to anyone still listening. We were conquerors once, he said softly. We built our empire on the bones of the weak. We believed we were gods, but we met humans and learned what gods fear. He looked down at the data crystal again, at the image of Jonah raising that metal cup and drinking the impossible. They taught us that strength is not in power but in endurance, not in purity but in defiance. They are what comes after us, and they will never stop. He paused, his breath slowing. The stars outside shimmered faintly as his ship drifted toward the endless dark. If any of our kind survive, he said, voice fatting, do not go back to Earth. Do not test them again, because they will not forgive, and they will not fall. The transmission ended. On Earth, Jonah stood under a new dawn. The sky glowed bright and full, streaked with light from debris re-entering the atmosphere like a rain of stars. He breathed deeply, the air clean, sharp, and alive. This is our world again, he whispered, and anyone who comes for it. He looked at the sky, his reflection burning in the sunrise. We'll learn what poison tastes like. Earth had been the Dominion's mistake. Now it was humanity's empire to defend. And somewhere in the quiet between stars, the universe trembled. Not from fear of death, but from the sound of humans breathing.